Hello, friends. This is Sam Cheney reporting for WeaponizedNews.com. Today's April 23rd, 2016. And amazing stories are being broken about 9/11, about the classified 28 pages redacted from the 9/11 Commission report. Cracks in the wall of lies surrounding 9/11 are starting to show. 9/11 truth is coming out slowly but surely. Here's another amazing report out of Zero Hedge. Obama administration makes stunning admission. Seed money for Al Qaeda came from Saudi Arabia. Following a dramatic deterioration in official diplomatic channels between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia when over the weekend the Saudis threatened the U.S. with dumping billions in treasuries if Congress were to pass a bill probing into their alleged support of 9/11 terrorists in the aftermath of last weekend's 60-minute report on the classified 28 pages from the September 11th Commission. Moments ago, earlier this week, the Obama administration made a stunning admission when, for the first time, it revealed on the record that the Saudis were the original source of funding for Al Qaeda. And now they're trying to blackmail the U.S. government by threatening to dump U.S. treasuries. Continuing, as Politico reports, Obama's deputy national security advisor Ben Rhodes, while speaking to David Axelrod in Monday's edition of the Axe Files podcast, said that the government of Saudi Arabia had paid insufficient attention to the money that was being funneled into terror groups and fueled the rise of Al Qaeda when he was asked about the validity of the accusation that the Saudi government was complicit in sponsoring terrorism. And here's Ben Rhodes, Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications. At first, he tried to tone down what amount to the first official admission of what amounted to the first official admission of Saudi involvement in 9/11, saying, "I think that it's complicated in the sense that it's not that it was Saudi government policy to support Al Qaeda, but there were a number of very wealthy individuals in Saudi Arabia who would contribute sometimes directly to extremist groups." Yeah, and these are our quote allies in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, who's a dictatorship, a bloodthirsty death cult who beheads anyone they disagree with, and openly funding Al Qaeda, now better known as ISIS. Continuing, sometimes two charities that were kind of ended up being ways to launder money to these groups. But moments later, the truth came out when he said, so a lot of the money, the seed money, if you will, for what became Al Qaeda came out of Saudi Arabia, he added. And then the punchline came out when Axelrod asked if that happened without the government's awareness, to which Rhodes responded that he doesn't believe the government was actively trying to prevent that from happening. In other words, the Saudi government knew that a number of very wealthy Saudi individuals were funneling funds into what would become the organization blamed for the attack on the Twin Towers. As Politico adds, the remarks from Rhodes come as Obama prepares to head to Saudi Arabia on Wednesday of last week and confront the strained relations between the two allies. The Saudis are still fuming over an Atlantic magazine article that describes Obama's frustrations with Saudi Arabia's religious ideology, its treatment of women, and its rivalry with Iran. Obama also suggested in the piece that Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states are free riders who rely too much on the U.S. military. Friction has also been created by a push from relatives of people who died on 9/11 and a bipartisan group of lawmakers to allow U.S. courts to hold the Saudi Arabian government responsible if it is found to have played a role in the September 11th terrorist attacks. The conversation turned even more awkward when Axelrod, who, as Obama's former senior advisor, knows very well of Saudi involvement with both Al Qaeda and September 11th, pushed Rhodes on at times awkward dynamic between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, asking, how do you explain that to Americans that, on the one hand, we call them an ally, and on the other hand, they have these deep roots in these extremist elements? A very good question. Those two things do not reconcile unless the U.S. government is covering up shadow elements within the U.S. government. The dark, deep state, as it's called, are working behind the scenes with Saudi Arabia to pull off false flags against the United States, continuing. I would stop short of saying that there was any willful government intention from Saudi Arabia to support Al Qaeda, Rhodes said. I think the difficult thing that Americans need to understand is we forge these relationships with governments because we have some shared interest with them. In other words, the state which even the U.S. government admits is behind Al Qaeda gets a pass because we have some shared interest with them. A shared interest that is clearly over and beyond revealing the government's role in the biggest terrorist attack on U.S. soil. Amazing omissions. Continuing. Rhodes added that for a long time the main interest was oil and security, which meant that the U.S. was slow to pay attention to that connection to extremist groups because the way the relationship was set up, we just kind of thought about security and oil and didn't kind of go the other layer down. Wow, very intense vetting of our quote allies about what the hell they're really doing. Ridiculous. They know all this. Continuing, but now the U.S. has its own shale industry and incidentally is being crushed due to Saudi overproduction policy. The shared interests no longer exist. Yeah, Saudi Arabia is committing economic warfare against the U.S. shale industry, trying to bankrupt the U.S. shale industry. And regardless about how you feel about it, Saudi Arabia is waging economic war against the United States at this point in time by overproducing and trying and reducing the oil market, crashing the oil market. Continuing. And yet, as White House spokesman Josh Ernst reported earlier, Obama is still refusing to pass the one bill that could finally reveal just how extensive Saudi involvement truly was in the 9/11 attack. So while we watch in shock as yet another conspiracy theory becomes conspiracy fact, we wonder how much longer will Americans tolerate a president, whether Republican or Democrat, who puts national interests measured in barrels of oil and avoids exposing rogue foreign billionaire murderers above the lives of thousands of Americans killed by terrorist attacks funded by this same government, the Saudi Arabians. We also wonder if today's dramatic